still to this day, I get emails and messages demanding that I denounce the vegan Cheetah. For those of you who don't know, you can enjoy and understand this video without knowing who he is. He's one of my fellow vegans here on the internet. He engaged in digital activism, digital public education, using social media to get people talking about veganism in various ways. And he's a guy who, in many ways, I do not have much in common with. I've commented many times, it's hard to imagine that if he and I had met face-to-face, that we would have become friends. The guy is such a heavy smoker, he's such a heavy nicotine addict, that it's hard for me to imagine sitting in the same room with him and having a conversation. You know, maybe if we were outdoors on a porch, you know, and the wind was taking away the cloud of nicotine that's around him all the time, maybe I could put up with his company. But I mean, in so many obvious ways, he and I are guys who are just very different, who just have nothing in common. And it's kind of sad to me that people can't look at the friendship we have and say, gee, isn't that wonderful that two people who are so different, who have so little in common, have this one thing in common, have this, you know, ethical commitment to veganism in common, and they're able to build a kind of friendship around it. You know, very unusual, very rare sort of friendship. A lot of people do not see that as wonderful. So I think, you know, on the one hand, there's this theme I've already talked about so many times, the issue of tolerance. I have videos that begin with the word tolerance and end with the word tolerance, and where I come back to again and again this concept I've been laying down, that politics, the virtue politics requires, is tolerance. And being tolerant of someone else is very different from agreeing with them. Being tolerant, you know, you don't tolerate people you have everything in common with. You don't tolerate people you think are right. You tolerate people you think are wrong. You say, okay, I think you're wrong about this, but I'm going to work with you, I'm going to cooperate you, etc., etc. And, you know, the internet has kind of exaggerated a tendency that was already widespread in the left wing, I think after 1989, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, where people on the left really defined themselves by a sort of moral purity that consisted in denouncing others. On the internet, obviously, there are people who literally spend hours each day, whether it's on Twitter, on conversation forums, whatever, denouncing others for being morally inferior to them. And still to this day, I get fan mail from people. I just got one the other day that was very sincere. Someone writing to me saying that they were a huge fan of my channel, they were a huge fan of me, but that they were never again going to watch my channel or my content because I had not denounced the vegan Cheetah, this other guy, for his opinions, for things that, you know, some things that I do disagree with, and other things that I'm indifferent to, but just illustrate how different he is from me, you know, that are more idiosyncratic, you might say, not necessarily matters of principle or what have you. I think this is sad in a bunch of different ways. I got 2 points here. First, there's a difference between debate and denunciation. And none of these people ask me to debate the Cheetah. None of them are asking me to engage in, you know, like, I wish there was more debate, even between me and the people who are currently my supporters or my fans. I mean, it was wonderful that I got support from Vegan Gains. I don't have a lot in common with the guy. We're both vegan. Obviously, there's room for debate there. Debate is not denunciation. I was wonderful. I've gotten support from Unnatural Vegan. Thanks to her for shouting me out and so on. She's done so in the past. She did so again now in this, you know, somewhat surreal circumstance of living in. However, again, there's a difference between debate and denunciation. There are many things I disagree with her about, and I think they're worth discussing. I think they're worth debating. I'm not going to denounce her. I'm not going to do what these people are demanding I do with vegan Cheetah. I'm not going to say she's a terrible person or what have you. I'm not going to turn this into a proof of my own moral purity by showing how intolerant I am towards her. The whole point is to tolerate and cooperate with and, you know, build constituency with people who you do disagree with. You're not trying to build a fanatical, puritanical religious movement. You're trying to build a broad-based coalition where, you know, to different degrees you interact with and cooperate with people. I've met several people through veganism who are heavily into BDSM, you know, into being a dominatrix or dominator or this kind of stuff. Now, I'm not against it. I don't see it as a, you know, it's not morally offensive to me, but that's not what I'm into. That's not who I am. But, you know, why, you know, what are you going to have this attitude of kick out everyone who doesn't agree with you on this unending list of moral principles that tries to define who you are as morally pure. Now, the other thing is, tolerance. We most often hear about tolerance in relation to issues of race, religion, nationality, gender. We tend not, in English, to talk about tolerance as much with these sort of fine, specific political beliefs, like how we interpret veganism, how we try to implement it. But look, I'm an atheist, and I have friends who are Christians. Let's say, for the sake of argument, I have friends who are Catholic. I want more. I'm a vegan. I'm happy to cooperate with and collaborate with and find common ground with Catholic vegans. Okay? Think about all of the terrible, unforgivable things the Catholic Church has done. And now think of all the terrible, unforgivable things that the vegan Cheetah has done. Charles, this internet personality. You guys are having such a great time tearing apart. Now, if your point is that morality is contagious, that I have to cut myself off from someone and denounce them as evil, because if I don't, their immorality is going to catch on to me like a disease, that I myself am going to be infected by how politically incorrect they are. That's the thinking here, is that if I don't cut off and denounce vegan Cheetah because he's made some comments about what kind of women he wants to sleep with on his Instagram or these kinds of things, which may be in bad taste and you may be offended, and you can write into him. I think he actually does reply to fan mail and hate mail of that kind. He's aware of the fact that a lot of what he says is somewhat offensive. The idea is, if I don't denounce him and cut him off, then I am tarred by the same brush, I'm blackened by the same sin, and I catch the disease. I become as bad and evil and immoral as him. Well, let me tell you something. The Catholic Church, within my lifetime, has covered up atrocities, including pedophilia, sexual exploitation of children, on an unbelievable scale. Now, you guys know, in terms of my scholarship and research interests, I've never been especially interested in the Catholic Church, but I have read detailed accounts, journalistic and historical, about sex crimes by the Catholic Church within my lifetime in Ireland, Spain, South America, Asia, around the world. Of course, in the United States of America, in Canada, what they, residential school crisis, history of the Catholic Church in Canada, the sex crimes alone during my lifetime that the Catholic Church is guilty of are so much more serious, exponentially, deadly serious, that there's a solid argument that I should refuse to be friends with somebody who supported the Catholic Church during this time, or somebody who still supports the Catholic Church today, because they're immoral, and I should cut them off. That makes a lot more sense than cutting off someone like Cheetah, who's a vegan and who's pursuing activism in his own way, who's discussing these issues in his own way, and who, says and does some offensive things, reflecting the kind of guy he is, which is very different from the kind of guy I am. And yet, we've all been trained. We all do know that tolerance matters. We all know that you have to tolerate someone who's a Catholic or who still supports the Catholic Church despite this, even if you don't agree with them. Tolerance only matters when you don't agree. When you do agree with them, tolerance is irrelevant. Okay, I disagree with you, but I'm going to respect you up to a certain point. It's less than respect. It's tolerance, people. You can feel free to disrespect them. You can feel free to disagree with them. But this is a whole different approach to life on Earth. And look, if you go back a little bit further, it's not just sexual exploitation of children. It's not just the sex crimes of the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is guilty of genocide on an unbelievable scale, of crimes against humanity on almost every continent on this earth. And really, if you look at the history of the Christian church in India, there are episodes that will horrify you. So all kinds of places that are not famous for the Catholic Church being barbaric, the same way, for example, South America is, or Australia is. The role of various Christian, the Anglican Church and the Catholic Church in Australia and Canada, what they did to Aboriginal people, it's unforgivable. It leaves a stain on the whole history of the human race, and of course, it has to shape the way I view Catholicism and anyone who would make excuses for and in support of Catholicism today. It does, in a really deep way. This is deadly, deadly serious. Whereas most of the things people hate Cheetah for are basically a joke. Now, so as I say, if you were really going to apply this in your life, if you were really going to be intolerant and judgmental in this way, you would have to cut off almost everyone who was a member of a mainstream religion, but certainly Catholicism, Anglicanism, most forms of Christianity. And you would have to seek out the company, a very narrow group of people who agree with you on a long checklist of things. And pathetically, that's what I see happening on the internet. I saw it happening before the internet with the left wing in Toronto, after 1989. So, there'd be people who, subscribe to a certain form of left-wing feminism and believe all pornography is evil, and then they're only friends with other left-wing feminists who believe pornography is evil. And over there in the other corner of the room, there are other left-wing feminists who actually think pornography is good and positive and okay. They're sex positive, or they have a different view of it, and they're only friends with other left-wing feminists who agree with them on that. These, tiny, counterproductive, ultimately, invidious and hateful groups of people cut off from everyone else, and most of their political energy, instead of in organizing to do something positive, goes into cutting themselves off from others. Now look, I've already said a bunch of times, you tolerate people when you disagree with them. I don't agree with Cheetah's use of the N-word, which my impression is he doesn't do frequently, but he has been caught a few times using the N-word on camera. I don't think it's appropriate. I don't think it's good. And I wasn't aware of it until a certain channel drew attention to it. And when I saw this video on this other channel, I wrote to the guy and said, that's interesting. You know what? I'll talk to Cheetah about it. And I did. We had a conversation about it in which I, expressed my reasons for disagreeing with him, and he expressed his reasons for living the way he does. And living the way he does reflects the fact that he's an ex-convict, and some of his use of language reflects habits he picked up in prison and so on. And that's it. I communicated to him as one human being as another, why I disagree with him, what my concerns were for the future, for how people... And you move on. Am I going to cut him off and refuse to speak to him ever again for this reason? And conversely, if you meet someone who is a member of the Catholic Church, who gives money to the Catholic Church, who is giving money to support this organization, and who may be making excuses to justify and vindicate that organization despite the terrible crimes against humanity they've committed just within the last 50 years, and go back the last 500 years, unbelievable. What is the meaning of tolerance in our lives? I close on this note, people. Sympathy. It's not an emotion to be wallowed in. The point of sympathy is not for you to feel good and pure and superior to your fellow man who lacks sympathy. Okay? Sympathy is an analytical tool. Sympathy is so important in politics because it helps you understand other people. You should use sympathy to understand the perspective of the other side. You should use sympathy to understand the perspective of people on your own side. You should use sympathy to understand the perspective of people who want to cooperate with you, who want to collaborate with you, but who may be profoundly different from you for reasons as obvious as the fact that they're a Catholic, they're an ex-convict, or hey, they're gay and you're straight, even if you're not homophobic in any way. Sharing your life with and cooperating with people who have fundamentally different religious views, different sexualities, different views of the world, it's a challenge. But I'm telling you guys, it's worth doing. It's worth making the effort. It's worth having an open mind and an open heart and reaching out to your fellow human beings, not to mention your fellow vegans, and trying to make something positive happen. It doesn't always work out. Sometimes you meet people and they're actually neo-Nazis. They're actually communist extremists. They're so far left-wing or so far right-wing or such religious fundamentalists you can't deal with them, and you say, look, I tried, now I'm done trying and I'm going to move on. But the reality is we live in a society that's built on a history of colonialism, genocide, war, oppression, slavery. And we're surrounded by all kinds of people who still support those things. I've met so many Australians who are still pro-genocide, who still actively support, their recent history of destroying their Indigenous people. I've met so many white Canadians who are pro-genocide, who, because I was working on First Nations, I was much more aware of this, who support basically the extermination and forced assimilation of the last remnants of our native peoples and their languages, who want to see that disappear, And of course, to me, that's deeply hurtful. I used to live in Cambodia. Cambodia is full of people, now elderly people, who committed atrocities, crimes against humanity, who were involved in what we call genocide, but mass murder in Cambodia. And at the end of the war, they didn't have trials. Those people just settled down and became normal law-abiding citizens and lived as neighbors with the people, some of the people who used to be their victims. Okay? So life is full of these kinds of deep and terrible contradictions. And the question of how Catholics and atheists and all these different views and beliefs can live together and work together and cooperate together in society, that's a question really worth pondering. And on a tiny scale, vegans, who are maybe 1% of the world's population maximum, I think we're way less than 1%, but I have no viable statistics for it. Within this tiny minority, you really want to break it down further. You really want to send me email asking me to denounce the vegan cheetah because of his blunt opinions about what he finds attractive in a woman. Look, shame on you, okay? I'm trying to do something positive. I hope you find it in your heart to do something positive too.